Are you or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
I believe I have the right to be confronted with any evidence which supports this question. I should like to see what you have.
Oh, well, you would.
Yes.
Under pressure, Hollywood caved in. Anyone suspected of having communist ties was blacklisted. Films dramatizing the heroic search for the enemy within hit the screen.
All right, that's swell, but I'm still a comic.
For the time being, yes. We have more surprises for the Reds, but we aren't ready to show our hand.
A wave of anti-communist paranoia swept the country in 1946, when news broke that Igor Guzenko, a cipher clerk at the Soviet embassy in Ottawa, had identified real Russian spies operating throughout North America. Arrests and deportations followed. Ethel Rosenberg, convicted of selling atomic secrets to the Soviet Union, became the first woman in U.S. peacetime history to be executed for espionage.
Yes, there was a certain amount of fear there. I never felt it. The people I lived with never felt it. Nobody where I grew up was looking over his or her shoulder to see if the red menace was crawling up through Ebbets Field or something. It wasn't. But there were people who felt it, and I think media particularly, it was the last days before television took over. The media in particular, the Hearst chains and a lot of the sort of right-wing conservative chains of newspapers helped feed the fear.
He's in here! He's in here! Get him! Get him!
With the fear of communism running rampant, Americans felt they had to stay vigilant or risk losing the Cold War without a shot being fired. The time was ripe for a demagogue, someone who would find communists wherever and whenever he chose to look for them.
You're next! You're next! You're
History Channel Classroom now continues.
Free? It means no charge. Pro bono.
Ameritrade is a great and wonderful thing.
And they said capitalism would never work.
Call toll-free 1-888-550-4005. Ameritrade. Believe in yourself. At 3G's, your mind is racing. At 7G's, it's oatmeal. Just how fast is fast? 700 miles per hour. 1,000 miles per hour. Fast enough to kill you. Then speed is as old as man himself. The technology has changed. The quest remains the same. It's the story of egos, then and now. The methods and madness of reaching top speed. All next week at 9 Eastern, 10 Pacific on the History Channel.
Today's History Channel classroom may be taped solely for instructional use and may be retained until May 31st, 2000. Thereafter, you must erase or destroy the recording. No other use is authorized by the History Channel.
Come on, baby, let the good time roll. Come on, baby, let me thrill your soul. Come on, baby, let the good time roll. Roll all night long. Come on, baby, yes, this is it. This is something I just can't miss. Come on, baby, let the good time roll. Roll all night long. Come on, baby, while the thrill is on. Come on, baby, let's have some fun. Come on, baby.
One communist on the faculty of one university is one communist too many. One communist among the American advisors at Yalta was one communist too many.
Joseph R. McCarthy liked to call himself Tail Gunner Joe, although he had only sat behind a tail gun as a publicity stunt. For 4 brutal years, the junior senator from Wisconsin reigned as the country's self-appointed commie hunter supreme.
Joe McCarthy was black-jowled, scowling, kind of sinister-looking person with a 5 o'clock shadow and a lumbering gait. And yet those who got to know him found him to be gregarious. He had the appeal of a tramp dog wagging its tail.
Joe McCarthy had little to show for his first 4 years in Washington. A group of newspaper correspondents named him the worst member of the United States Senate. With re-election approaching, he was a candidate desperate for an issue. On February 9, 1950, McCarthy arrived in Wheeling, West Virginia, to give a Lincoln Day speech to the local Republican Women's Club. He told his audience that there were 205 communists in the State Department controlling American foreign policy. It was a blatant lie.
Willard Edwards of the Chicago Tribune later said it was really a throwaway because if McCarthy had thought it was going to be a big speech, A, he wouldn't have given it in Wheeling, West Virginia, and B, he would have brought a bunch of reporters down who were right-wing reporters who were pals of his. So it was really a throwaway, but there was the charge.
The senator's accusations were published by newspapers across the country. McCarthy, elated by the attention, continued his speaking tour in Reno, Nevada, where Frank McCullough, a young reporter for the Reno Gazette, was sent to meet him.
Came down off the plane, made clear that he'd known us for 50 years. We walked away from the plane with his arms around both our shoulders. We walked down a Reno street, with his arm about our shoulders. And he discovered in the process of that walk that I'd been a Marine, and that delighted him, and we became even closer buddies. Instinctively, socially, for a U.S. senator to treat a Bush League reporter like that is not, isn't within the framework, and it made me very uneasy.
McCarthy was as easy with journalists as he was loose with the truth. In a subsequent radio interview, the number of communists in the State Department dwindled from 205 to 57.
We had the message from AP in which I think they quoted him as saying that he had in his hand a list of 205, and the story said communists, flatly, unequivocally. We began to try to examine him about, or question him about, why did you say 205 before and 57 now? I'll be honest with you, I don't remember what the answer was. It was a long argument, and we didn't get anywhere with it. And finally, it got to the point where at the end we were challenging him to produce this list of 57. We went through a great routine. He looked through his pockets, he looked in his briefcase, and he finally pronounced he'd lost it.
I remember when he came back from that Wheeling, West Virginia speech, he called me in and said, "Jack, I think I've hit the jackpot. But I don't really have much. Can you help me?" Well, I was anti-communist, and he was my friend, and I said, sure, I'll help you. I'll see if we've got anything in the files. And I searched the files, and I found one case that had been reported to us of a possible communist in the State Department, a man rather high in the State Department. And I turned the raw filage over to Joe McCarthy, and I said, you want to check this guy out. Maybe you've got something here, but check it out very carefully. This is the raw file. He read it verbatim on the Senate floor not long afterwards, and that's the last time I had anything to do with Joe McCarthy.
To Joe McCarthy, hunting communists was little more than a game in which he was the big winner. Around Washington, rumors of his drinking and gambling went unreported.
I don't think this is an exaggeration. I think in probably, certainly no more than an hour, maybe an hour and a half, we had 8 or 9 drinks. I could hardly get up from the table. And everybody drank the same. All 3 of us drank bourbon and soda. And we all drank the same thing. I can't remember who paid the bill either. I suspect we did, but I don't remember.
The press of the day had one weakness that Joe McCarthy understood all too well. Their standards required them to be objective, to report exactly what was said, even if it was unsubstantiated.
He understood also another maybe more important point, that denials are never as dramatic as charges, and they're always 24 to 48 hours behind. The consequence was, day after day, week after week, into the years, that the charges were A1, the denials were B7. And he understood that, and he played it to the hilt.
I remember that McCarthy was kind of a bully who was on your side if you were in the press. He knew the deadlines of the wire services. He knew the deadlines for all the major newspapers. He knew how photographers could take their pictures. And he knew that we had these big television cameras, film cameras, that couldn't stop when very easily. So he said something that would be just unheard of today. He said, boys, when I get to the important part, I'll rap on the side of the podium or lectern. And he did, and all the cameras were turned on, and they recorded just what Senator McCarthy wanted recorded, and then they turned off, and the film went back and was put on the air that night.
A Senate subcommittee investigates sensational charges by Senator Joseph McCarthy.
Joe McCarthy couldn't have found a communist on May Day in Red Square in Moscow in a review held by Joe Stalin, which was true. He didn't have the faintest idea what a communist and didn't care. You know, that's the most incredible thing about that man. He had the mind of a man, he had the body of a man, but he had the soul of a little tiny child pulling the wings off a butterfly. None of this was serious to him.
One of the accused is John Stuart Service, now summoned home, and concerning whom Senator McCarthy says,
Mr. Chairman, today this man, John S. Service, is a ranking officer in the policy-making group of untouchables on duty.
One of McCarthy's targets was John Service, a promising young diplomat who had served in the Far East. When Mao Zedong's communist armies conquered China, Service reported that Mao posed no threat to the United States. To McCarthy, that meant that Service was a communist.
When you have a weak case, you've got to use weak kinds of evidence like guilt by association. You saw Owen Lattimore at a 4th of July reception at the American Embassy in Tokyo in 1935. What did he say? And so on. I mean, you can't prove that you're not something sometimes. It's very difficult. That time, with all the publicity, I had all sorts of trouble. I wanted to get term life insurance. No thanks. They wouldn't do it. As a man said to me, how do we know you're not going to jump out a window? Some other people had. We rented an apartment in New York and then found that the owner changed his mind. He wouldn't lease to us.
While others suffered under his attack, McCarthy continued to bask in the limelight.
At the entrance of the committee room, there were 2 doors. And just as we got outside, there was a photographer. He said, "Oh, Mr. Service, stand right there. I want to get another picture." And I was sped up. I mean, the pictures were just an awful nuisance during a hearing. They were all around in front of you, and shooting up at you at the worst possible angles and this and that. And I said, to hell with it, you've got hundreds of pictures. And my lawyer said, Jack, take it easy, the guy, so he might even get a good picture, and we got to be nice to him. So I stood there, and just as I stood there, a door flung open, and behind it was Senator McCarthy. The great Senator of the United States had put this photographer up to this cheap little silly trick so he could get a picture of him and me standing side by side. You're not serious when you're engaged in stuff like that.
What was a joke for Joe McCarthy was deadly serious for John Service. Despite McCarthy's failure to prove any of his charges, Service's career was destroyed. One of the country's most knowledgeable experts on China spent his last days in the Foreign Service stamping passports in Liverpool, England.
Even though some people didn't understand communism, the word was a threat. They outfoxed our President Roosevelt on the Yalta, and it seemed that they got away with everything, the big piece of the pie. And so when McCarthy started the hearings, I was all for his going after the communists.
Here was Tail Gunner Joe talking about commies. Who are protecting the commies? The Democrats. And so the Democrat, the name liberal and Democrat became identified with pro-communist or communist sympathizer. Pinko was used constantly in those days.
You get the beginning of what is called McCarthyism because one party has really been in power too long, and much of the stuff that was surfaced as McCarthyism was an attempt of the Republican Party, which has been out for 20 years, to find an issue which would allow it back into power.
Plans have been discussed by leading members of the Communist Party and agents of the Soviet secret police to obtain blank American passports from the United States State Department, from communists employed in the State Department. But they say, oh, McCarthy, don't name them. Yes, I'll give that to Milwaukee's Daily Worker.
He was a demagogue, but he didn't look like a demagogue. He didn't act like a demagogue. He didn't speak like a demagogue. People, when they thought of demagogues, thought of Adolf Hitlers who held audiences in their sway. Joe McCarthy had this rumpled look, and he'd get up before the crowd, and he would whine, and he would stumble, and I think he would even deliberately shuffle through his papers as if searching diligently for the right name and the right fact. And he'd have to go back and repeat himself. And that was mistaken by a large number of people as sincerity. And he came across as a sincere person, and therefore as a believable person, and therefore as the most dangerous of demagogues.
Our function in coming back on the committee is not to expose and prosecute communists. Senator, would you like to hear this? It's about you.
Eventually, Tail Gunner Joe went too far. Wild and groundless allegations of communist infiltration of the United States Army cost him the support of even his most fervent allies.
And you don't have to have everybody looking at you all the time you're talking.
I'm the great pretender, pretending that I'm doing well. My need is such, I pretend too much. I'm lonely, but no one can tell.
During his anti-communist crusade, McCarthy ruined the lives of thousands of innocent people. But the man who had claimed the nation's undivided attention was ostracized and all but forgotten when he died of liver failure at the age of 48.
But tomorrow will say you left me to grieve all alone.
It was a mean time, a time for mean heroes. Heroes like Mike Hammer.
You almost wrecked my car. Well, Get in.
Pulp fiction private eye Mike Hammer was the creation of a former lifeguard and fighter pilot from Brooklyn who became the most popular writer of the 1950s.
I always said I was a chewing gum of American literature, which I am. I'm not a detective writer. I'm a mystery writer. Now, Earl Stanley Gardner was a detective writer. He did everything by the book and in good notes. He was a great writer, but he had a different style. My style went into, I had a lot of sex, violence, and love, emotional stuff, and I didn't stay quite to the pattern that they had.
I squeezed until my fingers were buried in the flesh of his throat, and his hands clawed at my arm frantically, trying to tear me away. I held him down until he was on his knees, and dead as he was ever gonna be.
He wouldn't have reached his peak of popularity if Splain hadn't been a very good writer. I think Splain was a writer of enormous energy and invention. But he was driven by the ethos of the period, which was an anti-communist ethos. So Mike Hammer was the ultimate sort of John Wayne hero in a way. You know, the hell with the subpoenas, the hell with the Constitution, particularly the hell with the Constitution, the hell with the Fifth Amendment. If you're a commie, I'm going to shoot you right between the eyes. I'll give you a real good beating on the way.
Where's Bella? Where is she? Where is she? Where is she? Where is she?
Mike Hammer was a steely enforcer whose mission was to exterminate those who would destroy America from within or without.
There was a moment when Mickey turned away from your run-of-the-mill bad guys and rats and things to go after commie rats and things, and I think Spillane writes, they were commies. They were real sons of bitches who should have died long ago. They never thought there were people like me in this country. Great stuff.
Spillane's books sold on a winning formula of commie bashing, sex, and violence. An explosion in paperback publishing technology made it possible to turn out millions of inexpensive books quickly. That meant Spillane's novels were available and cheap. Critics charged that Spillane was exciting the country's vigilante streak. He was called a dangerous paranoid. His creation, Mike Hammer, a sadistic misfit.
I went to a tea party, and at the tea party were all these funny little people that read books and whatnot. So this guy came up to me, a little bitty guy. He said, now, this is what he said to me. I can still remember the words like I'm hearing them from the day when they came out of his mouth. He says, what a terrible commentary on the reading habits of the American public to think that you have 7 out of the top 10 of all-time bestsellers. I said, oh, shut up. You're lucky I didn't write 3 more. Then I did, and they had to change the category out of 15 out of the top 25.
For an author who once wrote comic books for a living, Mickey Spillane had come a long way. By 1953, his books had sold over 17 million copies. The man who denied any conscious attempt to cash in on the anti-communist hysteria of the day was on his way to becoming one of the best-selling American writers of all time. But even Mickey Spillane's Mike Hammer was no match for the atomic demons that haunted the American psyche.
Lucky Strike presents Your Hit Parade.
In 1950, Your Hit Parade made its debut on the infant medium of television. 100 stations across the country now brought TV into 8 million American homes. Entering the American language were the words heliport, captive audience, and for products designed by women, femineered. In Boston, masked gunmen stole a record $2.8 million from the Brinks Express Company. The FBI, believing the robbery to be a communist conspiracy, would spend 6 years and $129 million solving the case. Days were numbered for elevator operators across the country when the Otis Elevator Company began installing a new passenger lift with automatic doors. A door opened for Althea Gibson, who became the first black American to participate in a major U.S. tennis tournament. In that same year, the Cold War turned hot. On June 25, 1950, troops from communist North Korea poured across the border at the 38th parallel and attacked the non-communist South. 5 short years after the end of World War II, America led United Nations forces against the army of North Korean dictator Kim Il-sung. For most of the world, the war was the first test of the new United Nations. To Americans, the Korean War was about one thing: containing communism. One of the first reporters at the battlefront was a young correspondent for Time magazine, Frank Gibney.
We stayed with one of our friends, an Army colonel, who woke us in the middle of the night and said, "They've broken through, head south." We got ferried across the Han River with the help of some Korean soldiers. And as we're going further south, then we suddenly saw a couple of American jets flying over. And I turned to my friends, I said, "Good God, this is World War III. It started."
Here, you better take this. Get out of fire carbine, sir? Just release the safety there and squeeze the trigger. It fires automatic till you stop firing.
I'm a lawyer from Denver, Colorado, Mike. I probably can't hit a thing.
Judas, how'd you ever get out here in a smelly ditch in Korea?
It's just what I've been asking myself.
It was a question that many young Americans would ask themselves. Early confidence in America's might evaporated in the face of the North Korean onslaught.
We were told that it was a light mop-up, and we got ambushed. We were driving down this road. We went over a little rice paddy bridge, and they let a few trucks go over the rice paddy bridge, and before you know it, all hell broke loose. The bridge was blowing up, and the trucks we were lined up and couldn't back out, so everybody just bailed out of the trucks, and there was machine gun fire, mortar fire. It was really hell, you know. I got hit by gunfire, and I was laying in the ground. Later, I got hit by mortar fire, and shrapnel severed my spine.
Our dear old mother's heads are hanging low. Got our orders to Korea, we must go. So mothers, don't be sad.
Out of condition and outnumbered, American troops deployed from peacetime duty in nearby Japan were ill-prepared to stave off the communist advance.
We hoped and prayed this day would never come.
It was a grim time. We got newsreels, and they were grim shots of American boys on some little hills with names that no one could understand, near places that no one ever heard of. I mean, no one had ever heard of Seoul.
On the American home front, the swift reversal of fortunes in Korea aroused fears that for the first time in history, Americans might lose a war. Worse yet, they might lose a war to the communists.
We're all being pushed on this issue of the communists versus us. Are the communists 10 feet tall? Do they have some magic stuff that we don't have? Are they the wave of the future? Or has the West, I mean, and there are all kinds of writers who are writing, you know, has the West become decadent? And there was this covert fear that the very quality of our affluence, of our material excellence, would make us soft.
I'll give you odds. Kane's dead 5 minutes after Frank gets off the train.
With the American dream on the line, Hollywood gave people what they craved: a righteous hero who inhabited a world where good and evil were as simple as black and white.
The golden age of the Western, the American Western, was
in those Cold War 1950s. High Noon, the good guy Gary Cooper, unsupported by the townspeople, who all hid under their beds, and he had to, as the Nietzschean superhero, go out and face the bad guys. And if not for him, the town would be taken over, the country would be dead, America is gone.
Our homes, our nation, all the things we believe in are in great danger. This danger has been created by the rulers of the Soviet Union.
Accused of being soft on communism, President Harry Truman was determined to hold the line in Korea. To do this, he needed a real-life hero. The victor of the war in the Pacific, General Douglas MacArthur, saw his wars in classical terms. He believed in fighting the enemy until they were utterly destroyed. For him, there was no substitute for victory. MacArthur sought victory by attempting the impossible, landing behind enemy lines at the seaport of Incheon. It was to be the greatest triumph of his long career. He took a town that everyone said could not be taken, and did it with very few dead or wounded. Following the general's battle plan, his troops swept inland, retaking the capital city of Seoul. On September 29, 1950, MacArthur arrived to restore the city to South Korean leader Syngman Rhee. MacArthur's orders were to destroy the retreating North Korean army. How far to pursue the enemy was left up to the general to decide.
He was the general. He was the man who knew. His was the master hand. He could do anything. And, of course, he had this long background, which no one else could match. He'd been on the scene as a general for about 30 years. And he knew Asians to this extent. He did have a respect for them. And he had this grandiloquent view of America. I mean, MacArthur would have been a perfect chief of staff for Theodore Roosevelt.
Operation Killer in Korea grinds steadily forward and northward, where United Nations forces face a new adversary, mud. The problem of bringing their superior firepower to bear is a backbreaking job for the Allies, but...
As UN forces pushed north, North Korea's Chinese allies sent a message to Washington. If American troops crossed the 38th parallel, the Chinese would enter the war. Dubbed the Sorcerer of Incheon, Douglas MacArthur treated the Chinese threat with contempt. If the Chinese did intervene, he said, he would deal them such a blow that it would rock Asia and turn back communism everywhere. At home, Harry Truman was alarmed. Joe McCarthy's attacks on John Service and other China experts in the State Department had deprived the White House of an accurate assessment of the Chinese threat. But Truman knew one thing. He did not want a war with China.
Come in. Well, 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 look who's here. I haven't seen you in many a year. If I knew you were coming, I'd have baked a cake.
Truman summoned his general to Wake Island in the Pacific. He was afraid that MacArthur might provoke the Chinese and start World War III.
He was not even sure whether MacArthur would come out to meet the plane of the President of the United States, but he did, and Truman was offended by the sort of MacArthur's, hat, that scrambled eggs and the old, the signature. field cap he had and the shirt, and Truman said if I had a man like that in my outfit, I'd have busted him so quickly he wouldn't have known what happened. So you have a natural tension. One, a tough, modest, feisty little guy who knows whatever else, I'm president. And then the other, this man of enormous ego and grandiosity who's thinking, I'm the senior figure, I'm the senior American political and military figure in the world. Why is that little haberdasher in charge of me? So you have these tensions.
MacArthur assured Truman that the Chinese would not come in. If they did, he told the president, there would be the greatest slaughter. With midterm elections coming up, Truman was content to bask in the general's glory.
250,000 Americans are now committed to the Korean struggle under the United Nations banner. Terrain, weather, and a ruthless foe continue to test men and equipment in a conflict that must go far to determine whether freedom will triumph over slavery.
MacArthur ordered his forces to press on toward the Yalu River, China's border with North Korea. Ignoring intelligence reports that China was poised to strike, the general boasted that his troops would eat Christmas dinner at home. On November 25, 1950, Truman's worst fears were realized. 300,000 Chinese regulars swarmed south across the Yalu River. The United States was now at war with the most populous nation on earth.
It is the worst American military defeat, I believe, since the Little Bighorn. It's a terrible, terrible, tragic moment in American military history. And all for no purpose, for no reason, for no gain. I mean, who needed to be at the Yalu? It's really out of his grandiosity and vainglory.
The Chinese quickly bottled up UN forces, trapping the U.S. Marines at the remote Chosin Reservoir.
Within days, they had us all surrounded, and our furthest unit was the 7th Marines, and then it was the 5th, and I was in the 1st Marines. And we were told, orders by General MacArthur, basically, is almost every man for himself to get out. And the Marine Corps upper staff said, no way. We're bringing all our dead, our wounded, our equipment out, which we did.
I was dancing with my darling to the Tennessee Waltz.
As the Tennessee Waltz topped the music charts back home, the Marines began their long retreat. For 14 days, they fought their way through the Chinese army in the brutal Korean winter. Letters from the conflict found their way back home.
Dear Mom, I'm writing this with my gloves on. It's too cold to take them off. This is to be my farewell letter if we don't make it today. They have us surrounded and we're going to fight our way out. It's been rough for 3 days now. I know I'll make it out okay. But if this is my last letter, you can rejoice in knowing that I am with my Savior and I have no fear and will do my job well. God be with you as he is with me. I love you all, and we shall meet again. PFC Clarence Friesen.
The beautiful Tennessee Waltz.
The success of the retreat was a brief moment of glory in a grim time. But at home, popular culture focused on the cruelty of the enemy. Lurid comic book adventures played on racial and ideological fears that the communist enemy was at once subhuman and superhuman.
Yankee, you die! Yankee, we come! We come get you now! Oh, Yankee, you die now!
As United Nations forces dig in for a winter stand against overwhelming Chinese Red Hordes, General MacArthur, Commander-in-Chief in the Far East, visits the fighting front in Korea. Accompanied by...
Stung by his defeat, MacArthur prepared to escalate the war. He proposed laying a strip of radioactive waste along the Yalu River and talked openly of dropping the atomic bomb on China.
His forces would be able to hold their own.
I believe that we must try to limit the war to Korea for these vital reasons: to make sure that the precious lives of our fighting men are not wasted, and to prevent a third world war. A number of events have made it evident that General MacArthur did not agree with that policy. I have therefore considered it essential to relieve General MacArthur so that there would be no doubt or confusion as to the real purpose and aim of our policy. It was with the deepest personal regret that I found myself compelled to take this action.
The storm which has been brewing between Washington and General MacArthur finally breaks with the news that the Supreme Commander has been dismissed by President Truman. Members of the press leave the conference in Washington to release the world-shaking story which will affect international policy in every capital.
That there had been fistfights on the commuter train from New York City to Westchester County that night between some people who were pro-MacArthur and some people who were pro-Truman. It just tore at the very fabric. It divided families, it divided friends, it divided people by ethnic groupings, all kinds of things. It was a devastating moment.
Oh, my darling, you made that promise when we wed.
Like the sheriff in High Noon, MacArthur had fought his last battle. Defiant to the end, he had lost the political duel with his president, but his flair for high drama captured the hearts of the American people.
MacArthur was a symbol, a wonderful symbol, of what was tearing America apart, the gung-ho aspect. One American is worth 10, you name it, certainly 10 Koreans, later 10 Vietnamese, 10, we can win. We are winners. We're number one. And the reality, which was a post-Cold War reality, which is maybe we aren't as big as we think we are, maybe we aren't as powerful, although we are the most powerful, maybe that's not enough to win all our wars.
After 14 long years, General MacArthur comes home, preceded by Mrs. MacArthur and followed by 13-year-old son Arthur. The hero of the Pacific debarks at San Francisco to deafening cheers.
I remember this. I was in the Chicago Bureau of NBC News when the general stopped in the Middle West, and I remember riding from Chicago to Milwaukee on the top of a car, of a Chevrolet camera car, and seeing the motorcade with miles and miles of motorcycle outriders preceding the general's open car as he waved majestically to the peasants on both sides of the road. And I thought we were in fascist Italy. It was just scary, the idolatry of the crowds who thought that this was some great uniformed hero who had come to save us from the dreaded Truman.
Once there was a mighty man sent to faraway Japan to defend the liberty of peaceful nations. While he did the best he could, there was some who thought he should let the communists take over all creation. Doug MacArthur is a name that will light the halls of fame.
He was a 19th century man who spoke in florid terms. It was almost like an overripe Victorian actor coming home, in an age which, because of television, was going to be increasingly cool.
And like the old soldier of that ballad, I now close my military career and just fade away. An old soldier who tried to do his duty as God gave him the light to see that duty. Goodbye.
By firing MacArthur, Truman may have prevented World War III, but it was not a popular move. His enemies labeled him a red herring. Calls went up to impeach the imbecile. Charges that Truman's Democratic Party was soft on communism would taint American politics for years to come. Discredited in the eyes of the people, Truman announced in March of 1952 that he would not seek another term in office. war in Korea would drag on, eventually ending where it had begun, at the 38th parallel. Korea was divided into communist North and capitalist South, exactly as it had been before any shots were fired or lives lost.
80,000 of them meet a blazing barrage.
The war was over there. It had nothing to do with the people back in the States. There was very little on the papers and the newspapers. Baseball was going on like usual. Everything was normal. Everybody had a good job. Defense factories were working. Unemployment was way down. Things were pretty comfortable here.
For a generation of Americans nurtured by war and want, the promise of the good life was unfolding beyond their most extravagant dreams. In 1952, General Motors was the largest corporation in the world. AT&T had recently gained its 1 millionth stockholder. At IBM, a company known for its adding machines, executives prepared to market a new device called the computer.
I speak with a sense of pride that all of my long life I have been a member of the Republican Party.
Douglas MacArthur wanted to become president, but the people did not want him. If they were to put a general in the White House, they wanted a different sort of man to lead them through the Cold War.
You, I'm in love with you.
Dwight David Eisenhower would be the choice for president. After years of uncertainty, Americans wanted to return to normal, and no one was more normal than Ike. A military man who wanted peace, a conservative who abhorred extremism, a father figure who, like Franklin Roosevelt before him, could prepare the country for what lay ahead.
But the main thing was the steadiness that in this very bad patch, who better to steer us through it than a man everybody trusted and a man of war who seemed more comfortable in a time of peace than Dwight Eisenhower. Perfect candidate, great political casting, and a good man.
With Ike at the helm, America was on its way to becoming a stronger, richer, more confident nation. One that would have the power and the will to project both its fears and its dreams on the rest of the world.